Emovis Ireland is a leading provider of mobility-based solutions, and they make the complicated easy because they believe in the freedom of going places. And today we're going to meet with Padraig Kenny from ARUP. He is a leader in road pricing and also in ARUP's digital business service. So Padraig, thanks a million for joining us.
You're very welcome, Aidan.
I have a lot of things I'd love for you to tell me about and questions to answer to inform me and the public. I know there'll be many people who know a lot more than I do, but even if we can start with the term mobility as a service, what does that mean?
Well, it's a new buzzword, a buzz term, and basically it's talking about the way technology is enabling people to choose the modes of transport they use rather than, my choice is getting into my car or taking a bus. I now can take out my mobile phone and say I want to go from A to B, and it'll tell me you can get this bus to there, then you can get the Lewis, and then you can whatever. And what mobility as a service is doing, it's enabling us to move from private own car motoring into multimodal travel, where the focus is not so much on the transport we're using as the mobility. How do we get from A to B? And what the apps do and the services do is they integrate all that for you, plan it all out. I want to leave at this time, arrive at that time, and it can bundle it up into the mobility as a service concept, bundles it up into special pricing for that. So you can either pay per trip or you can pay a monthly subscription, and you can have as much mobility as you like within that subscription.
So if I want to get the bus to a certain part of Dublin City and then take the Lewis, rather than paying for two different journeys, I can pay in one.
Yeah.
We can't do that yet though, can we? So what's the landscape like at the moment?
Well, so the landscape at the moment is, and it's in evolution, is we have different ways of travelling, different modes of transport. And at the moment, as an individual, you have to make your own decision about the best way to go from A to B. Different forms of public transport and your own private transport, or Shanksmere walk, or bicycle, or whatever. What's happening is that two things are happening. First of all, there's lots more service providers coming into the market with different ways of going from A to B. So you've the likes of Uber that you've heard of, which is changing the taxi business and the car for hire business, but you also have scooter operators coming in, the likes of Lime, etc. So you've got all these new options, and with digital technology you're able to get the information about them, when they're arriving, when they're departing, and all that gets joined up into a user-friendly app. And then the next layer on top of that is making it easy for you to pay. So we don't have any mobility as a service providers yet in the Irish market. It's emerging in different cities around the world, where you've got companies that are offering new platforms, new apps that'll bundle the different modes of transport for you, and you pay a monthly subscription for it. And those apps then will give you the information on how you get from A to B.
I lived in London for a few years, and it's transport for London, and if I wanted a tube or a bus or a combined journey, it would tell me, and it would tell me exactly when it was happening. Exactly. And do you know what, when I showed up, it did show up, which I think as someone from Dublin or an Irish person, I was shocked. I was like, oh my God, they're on time. Is that still...
and those systems are getting smarter and better, and that's the way that we'll be going here as well. So what you have to put in place, if you're behind the app, so from the end user's point of view, the whole thing is made easy through the app, through the platforms that does all of the joining up of the different modes of transport and the payment mechanisms and all that. But to get there, you need to have good public transport infrastructure, and you need to have an ecosystem of mobility that also allows private operators to come in and fill in the bits that the public transport doesn't do. And you also have to provide hubs, transport hubs, so connecting up your public transport so that your buses and metro links line up with your mainline rail in a whole networked transport network. that can cater for the volumes of people that need to travel at certain times of the day, etc.
And do we have the infrastructure for that?
Yeah, we have a lot of it, and we're in the process of putting more of it in. I mean, as part of the 2040 Ireland 2040 strategy, there's 2 billion being invested over the coming years in upgrading the whole DART system and the electrification of it, and 300 more carriages and everything else. I mean, major investment in DART. You've heard a lot of hullabaloo recently over the Bus Connect scheme, which is another part of that in terms of providing the public infrastructure and connecting it all up. We're in the process of the process of delivering the new Metro link from Swords to the across the city is in the process of being procured, and that'll be available towards the end of the next decade, in about 9 years' time. Again, it'll be one of the largest capital programs in the history of the state. I think it's budgeted at something like 6 billion or something, some massive investment. So the state is putting the investment in, the bus, Dublin Bus and Bus Éireann, Irish Rail, TII, everybody's investing in this new network.
We spoke to Rachel from the TII, I should say, and she talked about the silos and maybe the challenges that it faces just to get you all on the same team wearing the same jersey.
Yeah. So traditionally, if you were a bus company, you took care of providing bus services. If you were a train company, you took care of providing rail companies, and that was the simple, not so simple mission that those individual entities had. Now, in this new concept of mobility, where we want to get people out of private cars, we want to get them using integrated integrated multimodal transport, basically hopping from buses to Lewis to train, mainline train to a scooter, whatever gets you from A to B, but out of your private car, and using mass transit that's capable of moving large numbers of people in the city. In order to achieve that, you now need to think integrated networks. You need to join up the different modes of transport, so more integrated planning. And the National Transport Agency have been doing a great job in terms of that planning and that integration, working closely with all of the other authorities and public transport providers. But it's a journey. It's a new way of thinking. That requires a lot of collaboration and integration. Facilitating it is digital technology, right?
So even with that app you mentioned, who makes that? Does that come from the government? Does that come from the NTA?
Yeah.
With all the various stakeholders?
Yeah. So the Transport for Ireland through the NTA have an app out there that'll do that in terms of the buses and train services at the moment. But what's also happening is that you've got new app providers, new service providers coming into the market. So I mentioned City Mapper, another company, a Swim, comes out of Finland. What you've got is companies that are recognizing. Of course, you've got Google, right? And Apple. I mean, if you go onto their Maps app, if you go into Google and say I want to go from A to B, it'll populate a range of options and show you how you can go from A to B. So what's happening is that technology companies, some existing ones, some new ones, are joining up the data about the arrival and departure and the networks of the different transport modes and providing you with those options. Google will also provide you with an Uber option, for example, if you want to go any place, and then it's up to you to choose which mode you want. So what you've got the physical transport modes becoming connected through planning and investment and through collaboration between the different entities responsible for providing them, supported by the NTA in terms of that vision for joined up transport, working closely with the likes of Dublin City in terms of transport within Dublin, for example, or Cork City Council in Cork, or Galway City in Galway. together with state agencies like Transport Infrastructure Ireland doing the roads and the street network as well as the Luas. And then you've got the public transport companies, Irish Rail and Dublin Bus. So everybody is starting to collaborate and integrate, sharing data. A lot of the integration, a lot of the intelligence can come from sharing data at the platform level.
Well, that's a hot topic at the moment, the whole privacy data issue. Is there any concerns with that between the stakeholders and also then for me as a customer?
Okay, no. So the one of the great things that the European Union did a few years ago was to introduce the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, which gives every citizen the right to privacy and the requirement on companies and entities that are handling your private data to treat it as private.
Well, there's a lot of upsides to MAS if and when it happens. Is there any downsides?
Yeah, so MAS as a concept is great, but it could also lead to adverse negative consequences. So, for example, at a very simple level, it could, if it became easier for you to take a taxi rather than public transport, you could decide, oh, feck it, I'm not getting on the Luas. I'm going to call it. I'm not going to use the brand name, but I'm going to call a taxi service instead. Put it another way, the taxi service, if it has access to your location information, and we all, when we sign up for services on our mobile phones, we give access sometimes, our choice, to the service provider to track us. So this service provider could know that they're just after getting off a train at Houston, and you're on your way. You're actually standing at the Luas stop. Your intent is to take the Luas into town, which is
along comes
and the guy
taxi.
Or even you get a pop up says, "Would you like? I can do this for you this morning. I can do it
see
cheaper
where you are.
I can do exactly." So that is potentially the negative side of it. So
anything else?
There are other negatives. So. As these different companies are gathering data and also entering into service contracts, whether you're paying for it or whether it's a free service like Google, with service providers, the power shifts to those that have most information about you in the market. So instead of you making a choice to use public transport, the choices you make will be shaped by the service provider in terms of the way they bundle those services and what they charge you for it. So bottom line here is that if I'm a city authority or a transport authority, I need to have enough, first of all, control over the behaviour of the private operators and private mass providers that come into the market. And I also have to have enough data, information on exactly what's happening in my transport network so that I'm able to put in place the right policies and the right governance to make sure that the best outcomes happen for the citizens, for the public. If you think about the citizens of a country, city or a country, 80% of them are going to be fine. 80% of them will be digital literate, live in areas which are pretty well served by public transport or other options, have enough money, they'll be grand.
Okay.
But 20% of the population will not be grand. 20% of the population will be disadvantaged in some way. They could live in a remote rural area, or they could be living in a part of the city that has very poor public transport. They could be economically stretched, and they might be digitally literate, mightn't be able to read. Whatever the issue is, that 20%, looking after them is the job of the public sector. We can look after the 80%, and the 80% can look after themselves, but public authorities, public transport authorities need to think the 20% and make sure that the services we provide in terms of mobility support that 20%.
I see it with a lot of my friends who've had to move out of urban areas because of high costs.
And then they're stuck in the car.
And they've no choice but to take their car.
Yeah. And that gives you then the horrendous congestion that we have in Dublin City at the moment, where you're,
do you think though some people, it's just almost we're institutionalized to go, well, I'd rather sit in the quays for 40 minutes in the comfort of my car
of course.
than be sitting in a bus.
Of course. Or there is that, of course. So what's needed in terms of serving the greater Dublin area is more of those shared mobility type services, more of those flexible multi-passenger services that can ferry people in and out of the city rather than them having to go through the expense and hassle of a car. Now, to your other point about I prefer to be sitting in my car than on a stuffy bus.
Yeah.
I do think, I was just talking to somebody recently, that the nature of bus services has to change. The experience, the bus experience has to change. And I think it will, because buses are a hugely flexible way of using our road infrastructure and moving large numbers of people. So, something like the Lewis, when it's not packed, is, in my opinion, at the moment, a more pleasant travel experience than
the bus.
Yeah.
Okay.
When it's not packed. But a Lewis isn't flexible. It's on certain tracks, it goes a certain route, and it doesn't have the flexibility to be adapted at time of day for different routes and different volumes of passengers. The buses do. Buses are hugely flexible and are very effective and cost effective, as well as network effective at shifting large volumes of people from where they are to where they need to go. What needs to change, though, I think, or what needs to evolve, is the experience, the actual physical bus itself and the experience of travelling on it.
So can you foresee us we'll take Dublin, seeing as we're driving almost into Dublin city centre in a few minutes as the example. Can you see us sitting on an automated double-decker in 5, 10, 15, 20 years? Is it?
Yeah, so 20 years is a figure I'm comfortable with.
Okay.
5, definitely not. 10 to 15 maybe.
So it will happen, because I'm thinking of a sci-fi movie in my head. This will happen in Ireland.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, it's going to happen. The other thing I think is that the pace of technology adoption is speeding up, and the pace of change is speeding up, and you're seeing governments more interventionist as well in terms of taxation policy to shift people quicker from the traditional vehicles, the older vehicles that we have, into more environmentally acceptable and into modes that are going to be going to help us tackle the climate crisis,
And where would you say the transport industry is with the uptake of technologies? We see how rapidly consumed it is in media, in entertainment, in the medical industry. Is the transport industry in Ireland and globally embracing it?
Yeah, I mean, so the transport industry is all about technology. It's all about vehicles and how they run, and it's a technology industry. Transport is technology in motion. So it is very much a technology industry. However, it's a massive industry with a huge embedded investment by both users and companies in current technologies. So technology evolution is always a gradual process in the industry. An area that I'm heavily involved in is road pricing, which is around charging for road use, and that includes congestion charging, but also low emission zone charging in a number of cities around the world, where there are policies around charging more for high emissions vehicles.
We've seen in London with the congestion charge the contentious issue it's become, but ultimately on paper I'm sure climate activists would say it was a necessary thing, it was a good thing. Are we going to see more of an adoption of that here in Ireland, of road pricing?
Yeah, so it's one of the policy options that's available to achieve your objectives, and whether it's the right one or not depends on multiple circumstances. if you look at the congestion charging, I'm recently been involved in looking at the congestion charging scheme proposed for New York, for example. There, it's actually about tackling the problem of congestion as opposed to the climate issues. And that's where it comes from predominantly. So it's around tackling congestion. It's about demand management, and it's the usual story. If something is free, people don't have to think about whether they use it or not. If it's charged for, they have to think about it and they have to make choices. So that's why road pricing as a mechanism, the user pays principle, is a useful way of impacting behaviour and choice. The EU have two principles around this. They have the user pays principle. So if you use the infrastructure, you pay for it. Put it another way, if you're not using the infrastructure, you shouldn't have to be paying for it. Or put it another way, your contribution to the infrastructure should be proportionate to the use. So if you're driving, a big lorry, you pay more than if you're driving a small car. And the contribution that's made to the road infrastructure if you're on a bus is far less than if you're driving in a car. At the moment, we have flat rate system that doesn't equate at all to the road use.
So is that important to shift the mindset and physically shift people to public transport? Is to incentivize them?
It is. So the economics fundamentally affects choice behaviour, and you need to link the economics to the choices. The other principle that the EU is strong on is the polluter pays principle, and that directly attacks the climate change challenge. So user pays, polluter pays, they both come together in an economic model which charges for road use. And it also feeds into demand management around congestion charging, sustainable funding of the infrastructure. So it's got a lot going for it.
Okay, I want you to channel your inner psychic if you can, or maybe you have the vision and in 5 years' time, what's the landscape going to be like with mobility and transport in Ireland?
Okay, so in my view, we will have increasingly excellent public mass transit, being able to move, so you'll have good public transport options open to you. It'll be integrated and joined up at the user end, so you'll have good information on the choices and multiple choices to make about how you get from A to B, and you can make the choice that suits you best. It'll be a mixture of public and private companies providing those services in a blended network that is being designed and governed to achieve public good outcomes. I talked about social equity, optimal public value in terms of using the public transport as against private transport. It will tackle the congestion challenge we have by moving more people onto public transport and mobility options that aren't dependent on single car use. There will be much more shared mobility available to people. I talked about shared mobility as being a great way of moving large numbers of people around in a flexible way when public transport isn't available. We'll have a data sharing ecosystem that makes all this possible between the different entities. So at the governance layer, you'll have the public authorities able to see what's happening from the data and this is a huge thing.
You can change anything right now, but it's one thing within the transport industry, whether it be a problem or an ambition of yours, one thing, Padraig.
So the one thing, and we're working on it and it is happening, is to join up, coming back to the question you asked me earlier about the silos, it's to join up the stakeholders into a fully integrated team that is working together to design the optimal blend of public and private mobility services for the cities and for the country.
Personally for you, Padraig, what is it that drives you to make a change in mobility? What excites you? What's the passion there for you?
We've got so many mega cities around the world. Dublin itself is a pretty sizable city. We need smarter ways of moving people around these places if they're going to be pleasant and enjoyable to live in. solving those problems and coming up with the answers to that and providing those services. That's what motivates me. Another reason that I enjoy this job is because I get to work with lots and lots of people who are similarly enthused and passionate about it.
That must be one of the best things, to have everyone pulling in the same direction.
Well, you see, everyone isn't pulling in the same direction.
But okay, ultimately their goals.
Yeah, that's the point.
The end game might be similar.
That's the point.
How you figured that out.
So like I said, these problems are difficult and challenging. What makes the journey possible is the positive energy and the commitment that people have to solving the problems. So working together with people from different companies, different organizations, to try and solve the problems together, that sustains you, and that's positive. And Emovis is one of those companies that is on the same journey with us and has similar vision in terms of the great possibilities that technology and services can bring to the challenge of mobility, and it's been a pleasure to work with Emovis over the last 6 years.
So is there? It probably isn't, but is there a Brian Cody or a Mick McCarthy who's spearheading all of this, who gets everyone right? You're playing in that position. This is your role. You do that.
So one of the interesting things about from a personal career journey point of view, but also for this field, is that when you're faced with really complex problems, it takes many minds and many intelligences and many directing energies to get there. It's not one great super brain that's able to direct it. Now, on a personal basis, I started my career 40 years ago. And in those days, organizations and programs were far more hierarchical and top down and structured and siloed. But the world we live in today is far too complex for that kind of directive behavior. So, and instead, what you need is good frameworks, good collaboration, good leadership, people aligned around values and missions, and that's what we have in the industry.
Well, Padraig, thanks so much for joining us.
You're very welcome, Aidan.
On The Spin today. It's been informative, it's been educational, and I think as well, it certainly gives me optimism.
Oh, you should be optimistic.
That there is a plan. There's good people there, and they're going to make this work.
And there's lots of options, and everybody's working hard and trying to bring the best for the cities and the country together in terms of mobility and transport. So I'm optimistic that we're going to have world class mobility and transport for people in this country over the coming years. It's happening.
Well, best of luck with it.
Thank you.